When Crush confessed to another girl, everyone thought I would rush over and make a scene, but they don't know I'm wearing his roommate's hoodie and sitting on his roommate's bed. Zach was going to confess to that pretty transfer student. He had asked everyone to keep it a secret from me, but he didn't know that some gossips couldn't hold it in, and had already told me. Everyone knew I had a crush on Zach and dreamed of marrying him someday. This time, Zach seemed to have fallen head over heels for that girl. People thought I would throw a fit, cry and make a huge scene. Everyone loves to watch this kind of drama unfold between men and women. They were all waiting for me to lose it and rush over to cause chaos. But unfortunately, even after Zach successfully confessed, I still hadn't shown up. The crowd of onlookers, 3 layers deep, started to lose interest. Even Zach's face didn't show much joy. He put his arm around his new girlfriend and took out his phone. There were no calls or messages. Zach frowned slightly. Then he turned to the crowd and said, "I'm treating everyone tonight. You're all invited." The onlooking classmates all cheered. I had been standing behind some trees the whole time and only then walked out. Someone with sharp eyes spotted me and immediately shouted, "It's Lola. Lola's here." I knew it. How could Lola possibly stay away? Zach suddenly looked up. The moment he saw me, the corners of his lips curved up almost imperceptibly. I ignored all the people waiting to see some drama. I walked straight up to Zach. "Lola." Zach held his new girlfriend tighter. He looked at me and said flatly, "You can't force feelings. We've known each other for over 10 years. I don't want to say anything too harsh and hurt our old friendship. From now on, I'll still treat you like a sister. If you need anything, you can still come to me." Then he lowered his voice. "With so many people watching, don't make a scene. Go home." "Zach." I interrupted him and slowly took a step forward. He frowned again. "Lola, be good." I smiled and handed him the bracelet I had just taken off my wrist. "I came to return this to you." Seeing the bracelet, Zach's face suddenly darkened. "Lola, what game are you playing now? Take the bracelet back. I won't bother you anymore after this." Zach stared at me, his voice growing colder. "I don't care about this little bit of money. If you don't want it, just throw it away." As soon as he finished speaking, I turned and threw the bracelet into a nearby trash can. "You can throw away all the other things I gave you before too." With that, I left without looking at him again. By the time I reached the riverside, it was raining heavily. Standing in the rain with an umbrella, I thought about the dreams I had in the past few days. In the dream, because of Zach confessing to Olivia, I cried and made a scene. To force him to break up, I jumped into the river that night. But what was the result? I almost lost my life. Zach only stayed at the hospital for 5 minutes before leaving resolutely. The white family who had fostered me thought I was embarrassing them by attempting suicide. And because of Zach's attitude, they felt I was no longer of any use to them. They forced me to drop out of school and sent me back to my birth parents, who were involved in all kinds of vices. In the end, my life spiraled downward, and I died miserably in a foreign country. After I died, the person who collected my incomplete remains turned out to be the one I had always feared, and kept at a distance. And Zach, newlywed and in high spirits, never showed up. These days, the events in my dreams came true one by one. If it weren't for these dreams, I would have been frantically calling Zach by now. Then I would have threatened to kill myself and jumped into the river. I'm very grateful for this dream. It made me feel like I was reborn. I can change my predetermined tragic fate bit by bit. The third time I dialed that number, it was finally answered. I clutched the phone tightly and held it gently to my ear. The name Simon Yates lingered on my tongue several times before I finally uttered it slowly. The heavy rain cut off all the noise in the world. Only Simon's voice, slightly lazy, sounded deeply. "Lola? Simon, it's raining heavily. I'm by the river and can't get back. Can you come pick me up?" The other end of the phone was silent for a few seconds. I nervously gripped the umbrella handle, my palm clammy with sweat. In the dream, when Simon was collecting my remains, he seemed to cry. His tears fell one by one on my decaying flesh and bones. Even in the dream, I could feel that burning sensation. Later, he carried a small bottle of my ashes with him for a lifetime, and he was lonely for a lifetime. I couldn't help but tear up and choked back a sob. "Why are you crying?" Simon's voice suddenly came through. It was still that indifferent tone, even with a hint of impatience. "I didn't say I wouldn't come." "Then when will you be here?" "Wait. I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Okay, I'll wait for you, Simon." He didn't say anything else, and the call ended. 15 minutes later, I gave my umbrella to a mother and child seeking shelter from the rain. So when Simon arrived, I was already soaked from head to toe. When he got out of the car, his thin lips were tightly pressed together, his face as cold as if it contained frost and snow. I brushed my wet bangs aside and looked up at him with a bright smile. "Simon, you're really punctual." "Lola, you might as well die of stupidity." He coldly grabbed my arm and shoved me into the car. Then he threw me a soft blanket. "Dry yourself off. Don't get my car dirty." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror and then skillfully turned the car around. "Oh." I obediently wrapped myself in the blanket. Then I couldn't help but steal glances at him as he focused on driving. When he had no expression, he always looked very cold and unapproachable. Many girls at school liked him, but no one dared to confess. He was Zach's roommate. I often went to Zach's dorm, and every time I went, Simon seemed to really dislike me. Even now, although he came to pick me up, his attitude was still cold. Just now when he shoved me into the car, he used extra force. My wrist still hurt, with a ring of red marks. It's hard to tell that he had been secretly liking me all along. I slowly lowered my eyelashes. Everything in the dream had come true. But now, because of my changes, many things have also changed. Would Simon still like me? If he didn't like me at all, wouldn't I be causing him trouble by doing this? Back to the dorm? Simon suddenly turned his head and glanced at me. My heart suddenly skipped a beat, and I blurted out, "Yeah, back to your dorm." Simon gripped the steering wheel and snorted. Zach won't be back tonight. I know. I gripped the edge of the blanket, twisting it tighter and tighter. I'm not looking for him. The car suddenly braked sharply and stopped by the roadside. Simon turned to look at me, the frost in his eyes so cold it made my heart tremble. Lola, don't treat me as part of your game with Zach. I'm not. He stared at me for a moment, then took out his phone. I'll call you a cab. You go back by yourself. Simon. I bit my lip hard and snatched his phone away. Lola. He looked at me, but there was no anger or disgust in his eyes. His eyes were just very deep, filled with countless emotions. I suddenly felt inexplicably sad. Simon, I don't want to go back to the dorm. They're all laughing at me. I'm also afraid to go home. Can you let me stay at your dorm for one night? I hid his phone behind my back, my voice getting smaller and smaller. Of course, if you really hate me so much and don't want to see me, then forget it. As soon as I finished speaking, tears also fell from my eyes at the right moment, one by one, quietly and soundlessly. Simon didn't say another word to me, but he started the car again. The car drove towards the direction of the school, and finally stopped at the foot of his dormitory building. I followed Simon into the dorm. He went to the closet and took out a clean hoodie and handed it to me. The bathroom is over there. He's tall, so the hoodie was very big on me. It reached almost to my knees, like a dress. After showering, I just put on the hoodie and came out bare-legged. Simon glanced at me, and then averted his gaze. I walked past Zach's bed and sat down on Simon's bed. My wet long hair dripped water, quickly soaking the sheets. The shampoo and shower gel on my body were all Simon's scent. In the small space, the same scent permeated, creating an indescribable intimacy that was quietly growing. Simon took out a pack of cigarettes, coughed lightly. I'm going to smoke a cigarette. He went to the balcony. I curiously looked around Simon's bed. Light gray sheets and blankets, clean and tidy. There was a computer and books on the desk, also neat. I was about to look at the decorations on his desk when my phone suddenly rang. Zach's name was flashing on the screen. I didn't answer. He called again very quickly, seemingly with no intention of stopping. I simply put the phone on silent and put it back in my bag. Simon, I called out towards the balcony. He quickly turned around, put out his cigarette and walked over. What's wrong? I sat on the bed, having to look up to see him. Simon made eye contact with me for 2 seconds, then looked away, but I noticed that the back of his ears seemed to be a bit red. I got your sheets wet. How are you going to sleep tonight? He glanced at me, then at the wet patches on the sheets. His Adam's apple bobbed violently before he turned to get a clean sheet from the closet. You go dry your hair first. I'll change the sheets before you sleep. After saying that, he went to get clean sheets from the closet. I clutched the towel, thinking of how his whole ear had turned red earlier, and couldn't help but smile. When I came out after drying my hair, Simon had already changed to new sheets. You go to sleep. What about you? He pulled out a chair, not even turning his head. I'll play some games. Oh. I sat down on his bed somewhat dejectedly. Simon put on his headphones and was about to put them on when his phone suddenly rang. He looked at the screen, then turned to look at me before answering. Zach, what's up? My heart suddenly tightened, and I instinctively held my breath. I'm in the dorm. You say someone saw Lola come to our dorm building?